On Christmas Eve, she was abandoned at a candlelit table, her heart dimmer than the winter sky outside. She stood to leave, believing love had forgotten the road back to her. But a little girl ran to her, held her hand, and whispered, "Miss,
It's
who hurt your
magic,
heart?"
sweetie.
Behind her stood a widowed Marine, carrying years of quiet grief in his storm-gray eyes. And beside him, a German shepherd stepped forward, laying its head on her lap,
Can you be my new mom?
recognizing her soul before the man even understood why. 3 hearts, each cracked in different ways, collided in that single breath of winter air. None of them knew it yet, but that moment would become the night they finally found home. Seattle had a way of swallowing sound in winter. Snow didn't fall that night so much as drift, soft and slow, turning the old brick buildings along the waterfront into ghosts outlined in white. Inside Harbor and Hearth, though, winter stopped at the door. The restaurant glowed with soft amber light, candles flickered on every table, and someone had tucked sprigs of pine and cinnamon sticks into small jars, so the air smelled like warm bread and December memories. Eve Hartley sat alone at a two-top near the window, hands folded around an empty water glass, watching the snow slide down the glass in thin, melting lines. She had dressed carefully, the way someone does when they're trying to convince themselves that tonight might be different. Her trench coat, a warm beige, hung neatly on the back of her chair. Underneath, the navy knit dress she'd chosen skimmed the line between simple and hopeful, its long hem brushing her boots whenever she shifted. Her hair, long and chestnut with a soft wave at the ends, rested over one shoulder, a few strands curling stubbornly near her collarbone. Her eyes were the kind of brown that held light easily, deep and gentle. But tonight they were shadowed at the edges, like someone who had learned to smile through things that hurt. The hostess had lit the tiny candle in the middle of her table with a little flourish, telling her, "It's a lucky table, you know. Lots of good dates here." That had been an hour ago. The candle had burned steadily. The luck, apparently, had not arrived yet. 2 wine glasses sat perfectly polished and perfectly empty between them, like parentheses around a sentence that hadn't been written. Eve's phone lay face down near her hand. She'd checked the time so many times it had started to feel like a confession. At 7:05, she told herself traffic could be bad in the snow. At 7:15, she decided maybe the parking around Pike Place was worse than usual. By 7:25, she began to feel the familiar tightness in her chest, the one that whispered, Of course this is happening to you." She smoothed the front of her dress with careful fingers, as if neat fabric could steady an unsteady heart. She had said yes to this blind date because her best friend Rachel had insisted. "He's decent, Evie. An actual grown man with a job and a spine, not some drifting musician or commitment-phobic tech bro. Just dinner. Just try." At 7:40, the front door opened and a gust of cold air rolled through the restaurant, bringing with it a sprinkle of snow from someone's coat. Eve looked up, hope flickering before she could stop it. A tall man in a dark wool coat stood in the doorway, stamping snow from his shoes. He had black hair styled with a precise slick of gel, a strong jaw, and the kind of posture that said he was used to walking into rooms and having people notice. He scanned the tables with a faint impatience in his eyes. Then his gaze landed on her. His face fell by a millimeter. Not enough for anyone else to comment on, but enough for Eve to feel it like a draft under a closed door. "Eve?" he asked, already sounding tired. "Yes," she said, standing halfway, offering a small, careful smile. "You must be Trent." He shrugged out of his black overcoat, revealing a pressed shirt and slim dark tie, and dropped into the chair opposite without bothering to hang his coat properly. Trent Wallace up close looked exactly like the kind of man Rachel would call polished. His skin was smooth, his features sharp, his cologne expensive and a little too strong. But there was a hollowness behind his eyes, like someone always a little bit bored. He exhaled, a long, audible sigh that puffed his cheeks for a second. "Look," he said, picking up the menu for form's sake, but barely glancing at it. "I'm going to be honest with you." Eve's fingers curled lightly around the edge of the tablecloth. "Okay. My mother has been on this, 'You should settle down. I want grandkids' kick for the last 3 years," he said, voice flat, almost rehearsed. "She knows Rachel. Rachel knows you, and here we are. I'm sure you're nice." His eyes skimmed over her, the dress, the boots, the hair, like he was appraising a piece of furniture. "But I don't really go for your type." Something in her went very still. "My type?" Trent made a small, circling motion with his hand, as if he could wave her entire personality into a single gesture. "You look like you have opinions, like you read books with feelings and would ask me about my childhood or something. I don't do well with women who push. I'm into softer energy, less—" He squinted, searching for the word, self-possessed. There it was, not said cruelly, not said loudly, but said plainly enough to sting. Eve felt heat crawl up the back of her neck, humiliation and anger arm wrestling in her chest. "We haven't even ordered," she managed, her voice gentle out of habit more than anything. "You don't know me." He set the menu down like a prop in a play that had failed to interest him. "I know enough. I showed up so my mother would get off my back. You showed up because you're still trying. That's admirable, I guess. But this isn't going to be a thing. No hard feelings." He pushed back his chair, straightened his tie, and smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from his coat as he put it back on. "Merry Christmas," Trent said, in a tone that had never been farther from merry, and turned away. For a heartbeat, Eve thought he might look back, might add something kind, something to soften the blow. He didn't. He walked through the warm glow of the restaurant and out into the snow, the door swinging shut behind him with a little jingle of the bell. The sounds around her swelled. Cutlery clinking, a child laughing, someone at the bar telling a loud story with big hand motions. But they felt far away, like she was underwater listening to a world above. The little candle between the 2 empty wine glasses flickered once, then steadied. The hostess glanced over from her podium with a sympathetic wince and quickly looked away, not sure whether to intervene. Eve sank back into her chair. For a moment, she just stared at the place where Trent had been, as if the outline of him might still be there. Then she let her gaze drop to her lap, smoothing the navy knit over her knees with trembling fingers. She had thought privately that she was past this, past expecting anything, past the kind of hope that left bruises when it fell. She had told herself she was fine alone. She had believed it most days. Tonight, the lie cracked. If she had stood up right then, grabbed her coat and walked out into the snow, her life would have gone on almost exactly the same. She would have gone home to her small apartment with the string lights over the window and the half-finished illustration spread on her kitchen table. She would have made tea, crawled into bed, and added this night to the quiet pile of disappointments she no longer spoke aloud. And she would never have met the 3 souls sitting just out of sight, 3 tables away, whose lives and hers were about to tangle together in a way none of them could have predicted. The thought, years later, would make her stop sometimes in the middle of washing dishes or crossing a street. How close she had come to missing the one moment God had quietly lined up for her, like a single lantern left burning in a dark corridor. For now, though, all she felt was tired. Tired in the bones, in the places no one could see. She swallowed, tasting the metallic tang of humiliation at the back of her throat. A server approached, a young woman with curly hair pulled back into a bun, concern softening her features. "Can I get you anything? Water, maybe? Or would you like to move to the bar?" Eve raised her head, forcing a small, practiced smile, the kind meant to reassure strangers that their discomfort mattered more than hers. "I'm okay," she said. "Thank you." The server hesitated, then nodded and left her with a sympathetic look. Okay. The word rattled around inside her. She wasn't okay, not really. She was 32 and tired of being almost enough for men who wanted convenience instead of commitment, quiet instead of conversation, someone pliable instead of a partner. Tired of watching other people's lives knit themselves into families, while hers felt like a single, loose thread. She picked up her phone, not to check the time this time, but to open a message thread labeled Family. Hartley. Her mother had sent a picture an hour ago of the whole clan crowded around a too-small table in the suburbs. Everyone in ugly Christmas sweaters, her dad holding up a plate of overcooked turkey with theatrical despair. The caption read, "Still a spot on the couch if you change your mind, kiddo. Love you." She had said no because she hadn't wanted to show up alone again, to fend off well-meaning questions and jokes about her romantic standards. She had chosen this instead, chosen to believe, for one more night, that love might still be out there somewhere in the city, walking toward her. It hadn't walked. It had turned on its heel and left before the breadbasket arrived. Eve exhaled slowly, feeling the burn of tears she refused to let fall in public. Not here. Not under this soft light, surrounded by strangers. She reached for her beige trench coat, fingers finding the familiar weight of the fabric, and slid one arm into the sleeve. The candle on the table gave a little wave of flame, as if in farewell. She was just pushing back her chair when she heard it, a voice so small she almost mistook it for her own thought. A little bell of sound cutting through the noise, like it had been meant only for her. "Miss, why is your face sad?" Eve froze halfway between sitting and standing, muscles locking in an awkward, almost rise. She turned her head slowly. Beside her chair, barely tall enough for her eyes to clear the edge of the table, stood a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 4. Her hair was a soft brown, curled into loose ringlets that bounced around her cheeks. She wore a red velvet dress with a ribbon sash tied slightly crooked at the back, white tights, and tiny red shoes that still had a dusting of melted snow on them. In one hand, she clutched a well-loved stuffed rabbit by one ear, its fur worn thin in spots. Her eyes were what caught Eve, though, gray with a hint of storm blue, wide and terribly sincere, staring up at her like she had asked a perfectly ordinary question and expected a perfectly honest answer. There was no shyness in her, only a kind of undaunted kindness small children sometimes possessed before the world taught them otherwise. Eve's voice came out rough. She cleared her throat, trying to summon a lightness she didn't feel. "I'm okay, sweetheart." The little girl considered this, lips pursed. Up close, Eve could see the faint smudge of chocolate at the corner of her mouth, the tiny freckle near her left eyebrow. "You don't look okay," the child said solemnly. "You look like my daddy when he thinks I'm not watching." Something in Eve's chest shifted, a small, startled ache. "Hazel?" a man's voice called from a few steps away. It was deep and low, with the rough edge of someone who had shouted commands over wind and engine noise, and never quite got the rasp out of his throat. There was patience in it, and an undercurrent of worry. Eve looked up. The man standing near the next table over was tall, easily 6'1", with shoulders that filled out a faded green field jacket in a way that suggested they were used to carrying weight. His hair was dark brown, cut short in a no-nonsense high and tight that framed a face both strong and weary. Angular jaw, a shadow of stubble along his cheeks and chin, a nose that looked like it had been broken once and set without much fuss. His eyes were that same storm gray as the little girl's, but deeper, older, holding a history of things he didn't say out loud. Snow still clung in tiny melting crystals to the shoulders of his jacket and the laces of his weathered coyote tan boots. At his side, half hidden behind his leg, was a German shepherd. The dog was large but not hulking, its body lean and powerful under a black canine harness scuffed from years of use. Its coat was a rich sable blend of black and gray with a lighter, blunt triangle of fur on its chest. Its ears were pricked, alert, and its eyes, deep amber, intelligent, watchful, flicked from Hazel to Eve with a focus that felt almost human. The man stepped closer, resting a calloused hand gently on the little girl's shoulder. "Sorry," he said, offering Eve a nod that somehow managed to be respectful without being intrusive. Up close, the creases around his mouth and eyes suggested a man who had once laughed easily, but now rationed his smiles. "She's very friendly. We're working on boundaries." Hazel tilted her head up toward him. "But Daddy, her heart is sad," she protested, eyes darting back to Eve. "You said when someone's sad, we have to be extra kind." The corners of the man's mouth twitched, as if caught between reprimand and reluctant agreement. He looked at Eve fully then, and for a brief second, something passed between them. Not romance, not even recognition. Just two tired souls acknowledging each other across the tiny distance of a restaurant aisle. Eve opened her mouth to say it was fine, that really she was okay, that they didn't need to worry about her. The words caught behind her teeth. The German shepherd took a single step forward, as if making a decision. It moved with the quiet, grounded confidence of a dog that knew its strength and didn't need to prove it. It came to stand beside Hazel, then slowly lowered its head and set its chin, warm and surprisingly heavy, on Eve's knee. Its amber eyes looked up at her, steady and unblinking, as if measuring something far beyond the surface. Eve's breath hitched. She had always believed animals sense things people missed: storms, earthquakes, moods. But the way this dog held her gaze made her feel briefly, absurdly, like it saw more than she did. Like it saw past the nice dress and the fixed smile, down into the hollow places she tried so hard to hide. Hazel brightened. "See?" she said, as if the dog's action had confirmed a hypothesis. "Ranger likes you. He only does that with family." Eve let out a soft, incredulous laugh that tasted like salt and relief. Somewhere deep inside, under the ache, a tiny, impossible thought flickered to life. She had walked into Harbor and Hearth that night, believing love had passed her by. She did not yet know that love, unexpected, inconvenient, and stitched together from a widowed Marine, a fierce little girl, and a dog with a soldier's soul, had just laid its head gently on her knee. If you've ever felt like God might still be weaving quiet miracles out of ordinary nights like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Guardian Stories Ridge, so you don't miss the next time Grace walks into the room when someone thinks they're all alone. Snow-drizzled warmth drifted through Harbor and Hearth as Eve Hartley wiped her cheeks discreetly, hoping no one noticed the remains of a blind date gone painfully wrong. The candle on her empty table flickered like it was trying to console her, but she felt hollow. like Christmas Eve had turned into a referendum on whether love remembered she existed. She reached for her coat, preparing to disappear quietly into the storm outside, when a tiny voice rose beneath her line of sight. Soft, earnest, and impossibly gentle. "Miss, why is your face sad?" Eve startled. Standing beside her was a little girl no older than 4, wearing a red velvet dress and clutching a worn white bunny by the ear. Her cheeks were rosy from the cold, and her gray eyes, startlingly gentle, shimmered with the kind of compassion only children seemed capable of offering freely. Before Eve could find words, the girl tipped her head. "Do you need a hug?" "I'm very good at hugs." Eve's throat tightened. A laugh, small and broken, escaped her before she could stop it. Then a deep, calm voice cut through the moment. "Hazel." The owner of the voice stepped closer, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying both the quiet presence of a soldier and the weight of a man who'd lost more than he ever spoke about. Caleb Warren, 36, former United States Marine, wore a weathered olive field jacket over a charcoal sweatshirt, dark jeans, and boots scuffed from years of service. His hair, dark brown, cropped short, held flecks of snow, and his jaw carried the rough shadow of a man who often forgot to sleep. Behind him moved a German shepherd, Ranger. 4 years old, sable black and gray, muscular, steady, and alert. His amber gold eyes scanned Eve with unsettling intelligence, as if reading every tremor inside her. Caleb lifted Hazel gently into his arms. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low but warm. "She's friendly. Sometimes. Too friendly." Hazel shook her head vigorously. "Daddy says when someone looks sad, we have to be extra kind." Then she pointed at the empty chair across from Eve. "Miss, will you eat with us, please?" Eve blinked at her, at them, at the shepherd who now stepped closer, sat at her feet and, without hesitation, rested his head softly against her leg. A jolt ran through her. Not fear. Recognition. It felt like the dog chose her first, before she even chose herself. Caleb frowned slightly in surprise. "He doesn't usually do that with strangers?" Eve exhaled shakily, laying a trembling hand on Ranger's head. "Well, maybe I'm not a stranger to him." The tiniest smile tugged at Caleb's mouth, surprised, involuntary, almost shy. Something about it warmed her in a way the candle never could. He cleared his throat. "We're sitting just over there, if you'd like to join us." No pressure. No pity in his tone, no flirtation. Just sincerity. The thing she'd been starved for. Hazel reached out her small hand. "Come sit with us. Daddy said Christmas is for not being alone." Eve swallowed the ache rising in her chest. She took Hazel's hand, and something small and long silenced inside her, lifted its head and breathed again. Caleb pulled out a chair for her, a simple gesture but done with the quiet correctness of a man raised on discipline and gentleness in equal measure. Hazel climbed into the middle seat, proudly placing her bunny in front of her, like an extra guest. Ranger curled beside Eve's boots, relaxed yet watchful. Caleb slid a steaming mug across the table toward her. "Try this. It'll help warm you up." Her fingers brushed the ceramic, warm, steady, like the first thing all night that didn't feel breakable. "Thank you," she murmured. Hazel launched into a story about how the supermarket Santa had sneezed so loudly the whole line jumped. Eve tried to smile and found this one wasn't forced. Caleb watched the exchange with a softness that surprised even him. Eve felt eyes lingering on them from nearby tables, curious about the little, unexpected family forming around her. She tucked a curl behind her ear and tried to ignore her flustered heart. Ranger lifted his head, nudged her elbow gently, then stared, intently, knowingly. Eve blinked. What is he telling me something? Caleb hesitated. He's trained to pick up distress, emotional signals. Sometimes he reacts before I do. Before you? She echoed softly. Caleb gave a quiet nod. Without warning, Ranger shifted closer and let out a low, almost protective rumble. Not aggressive, but purposeful. His body angled toward Eve, shielding her subtly from the aisle. Eve startled. Did I do something wrong? Caleb's expression tightened, then softened as realization dawned. No, he murmured. He thinks someone hurt you tonight. Eve's breath hitched. Ranger pressed his forehead gently to her thigh, a gesture full of instinctive loyalty. Hazel looked between them, whispering as if witnessing magic. He picked you, Daddy. Ranger picked her. The words wrapped around Eve like a prophecy she was afraid to believe. Caleb's gaze met hers, steady and unreadable. I've learned not to doubt his instincts. The restaurant hum faded, replaced by something quieter. A connection forming, not forced, not rushed, just real. And Eve felt it, felt seen, felt chosen, maybe for the first time in years. Dinner unfolded in soft waves. Hazel talked about snowflakes that looked like tiny angels. Caleb listened patiently, correcting her fork grip with gentle humor. Ranger remained near Eve like a sentry. At one point, Hazel looked between the two adults with innocent fascination. Miss Eve? Yes, sweetheart. You look happier now. Eve's breath trembled. I think I am. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly, as if her happiness mattered to him more than it should for someone he had just met. He wasn't flirting. He wasn't performing. He was simply present. And after the way her night had begun, presence felt like a miracle. Hazel leaned on Eve's shoulder, eyelids drooping. Ranger sighed deeply, settling more firmly at Eve's feet. Caleb watched quietly, something unreadable in his gaze. The kind of look a widowed man gives when he sees something unexpected, something he didn't think his heart had room for anymore. Eve brushed a thumb across Hazel's tiny hand. And for the first time that Christmas Eve, she didn't feel alone. As Hazel drifted toward sleep, Caleb shifted in his seat. Eve, he said softly, for what it's worth, I'm glad you didn't spend tonight alone. She swallowed hard. So am I. Outside, snow began to fall again, quiet and purposeful. Inside, a Marine, his daughter, and a shepherd sat with a woman whose heart was still trying to trust itself. But something had begun. Something small. Something right. Something chosen. If moments like this touch your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe. Sometimes God sends the right people in the quietest ways. The next afternoon, the snow along the Seattle waterfront had softened into slush, and the gray winter sky pressed low over the quiet marina. Eve Hartley pushed open the glass door of a small cafe tucked beside the harbor. A place with fogged windows, mismatched mugs, and the lingering smell of cinnamon. She had arrived early, nerves fluttering in her chest like startled wings. Caleb Warren stepped inside a few minutes later. His boots left melting prints on the wooden floor. He wore the same olive field jacket from the night before, the collar slightly frayed, the shoulders dusted with leftover snow. His short, dark brown hair was damp, and there were faint shadows beneath his storm-gray eyes, shadows that hinted at long nights and longer memories. Hazel wasn't with him today. She's spending the afternoon with my mom, Caleb said as he approached her table. His voice was calm, a little quieter than the night before. I thought it might help us talk more openly. Eve nodded. She wasn't sure what she expected. but she could sense something heavy beneath his composed posture, as if he had carried it for years without ever setting it down. They sat by the window, overlooking the slow-moving water, the harbor muted by winter's breath. A young barista with curly red hair brought them coffee. She wore a sweater 2 sizes too big and hummed a carol off-key. Eve thanked her softly. For a moment, neither Eve nor Caleb spoke. There was only the quiet clink of a spoon against ceramic, the soft tapping of sleet against the glass. Then Caleb inhaled, slow, steady, but the kind of breath someone takes before walking toward a long-buried truth. "I want to tell you about Alyssa," he began. Eve looked up, surprised he was willing to share something so intimate. He saw the question in her eyes and nodded faintly, giving himself permission to continue. "Alyssa was my wife," he said. "She was bright, funny. She talked too fast when she was excited. She loved old records and bad coffee, and she used to leave notes in Hazel's baby books just so I'd find them years later." His voice softened. She was 28. Eve felt her chest tighten. Caleb stared at his coffee, fingers tightening around the warm mug. "She died in a car accident 3 years ago. I was deployed. Comms were down that day. I didn't get the call until hours later." His eyes drifted toward the window, the world outside dimming as old pain resurfaced. Hazel was just learning to say, "Mama." She never got to finish the word. He swallowed hard. "My team flew me back, but by the time I reached the hospital..." He paused, jaw flexing. There was no goodbye left. Just a hallway, and a doctor who couldn't meet my eyes. Eve reached instinctively toward him, but stopped halfway, giving him space to choose whether he needed closeness or distance. Caleb rubbed his thumbs together, grounding himself. When I walked into our house, the first thing I heard was Hazel's toy, a little star-shaped thing that plays lullabies. It fell off the shelf when I opened the door. He exhaled sharply. Sounded like something breaking. His voice wavered for the first time. "Ranger wouldn't get up," he whispered. He was lying by Alyssa's reading chair. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't move, eyes just empty, like he'd lost his person and didn't know who to protect anymore. Eve felt her own breath tremble. She imagined the quiet house, the abandoned chair, the fallen toy, the echo of a life interrupted. And she understood something deep about the man in front of her. He wasn't just grieving a wife. He was grieving the future he thought he had secured. Ranger's absence suddenly felt like a presence, its weight settling between them. And then, as if on cue, the dog appeared outside the cafe's window. Someone walking by had stopped to pet him. Ranger ignored the stranger entirely. Instead, he stood perfectly still, ears high, eyes sharp, fixed on Eve through the glass with uncanny focus. Eve froze. Caleb turned, his brows pulled together. "He's tracking you," Caleb murmured, "like he senses something. Or someone." Ranger held her gaze for a long, unsettling moment. Protective, alert, loyal to a bond she hadn't fully understood yet. A second later, he nudged the door with his nose until the passing stranger opened it, and Ranger trotted inside, straight toward Eve, settling beside her like he belonged there. Like he had chosen her again. A ripple ran through her, part fear, part wonder, part something she didn't have words for yet. Caleb watched carefully, an unspoken truth flickering behind his eyes. "Ranger's instincts have never been wrong," he said softly. Eve wasn't sure what that meant for her, but she felt it. A shift, a pull, something destined. Ranger rested his head on Eve's foot, a gesture so intimate and instinctive that her throat closed with unexpected emotion. She stroked his fur, thick, warm, alive, and the comfort nearly undid her. Caleb looked down at the shepherd, then back at Eve. "I've spent years thinking I failed Alyssa," he admitted. "I could save men in battle, but not the woman I loved." Eve shook her head gently. "That wasn't yours to carry." "It feels like it is," he said. "Every day." She understood that feeling. The heavy, slow-burning belief that maybe love always slipped through her fingers because she wasn't worth staying for. She took a breath. "You're not the only one who feels broken," she said softly. "I've been the almost choice for a long time. The backup plan. The you're great, but ending to every hopeful beginning." Caleb looked up sharply, something protective stirring in his gaze. She gave a small, humorless laugh. "It messes with you. Makes you wonder if you're meant to be someone people settle for, not someone they choose first." Caleb reached for the spoon resting on his saucer. He rotated it slowly and then angled the polished metal toward her. "Look," he murmured. Her reflection bent slightly in the curved surface, distorted, imperfect. "Even when the image warps," he said, "your eyes are still yours, still clear, still honest." His voice dropped lower, steadier. "Anyone who can't see that isn't someone who deserves the heart you're offering." Her breath caught. She didn't realize she'd been waiting years for someone to frame her worth so simply. Caleb continued, softer. "You don't have to change to fit anyone's expectations. You're already enough." Tears pricked her eyes, but not from sadness, from the gentle shock of being seen. Ranger lifted his head again, pressing close to her side, as if agreeing, as if promising something. Eve let out a trembling exhale. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt a seam inside her heart soften instead of split. Caleb noticed. He didn't touch her, but his presence leaned closer without moving an inch. Two burdened hearts, two separate hurts, beginning to recognize each other's fractures. And somewhere beneath the hum of the cafe and the murmur of distant carols, something new began to root itself quietly. Tender, but real. Not love, not yet, but the first fragile warmth of hope. If this moment touched your spirit, please like, comment, and subscribe. Sometimes God heals us by sending the right people at the right time. Winter settled deeper over Seattle, softening the city under layers of quiet white. In the weeks that followed their harborside conversation, something subtle began to change. Slowly, naturally, like frost melting under the first hint of sunlight. Eve Hartley didn't realize she'd become part of the Warren family's rhythm until the rhythm felt incomplete without her. It started with small visits. Caleb bringing Hazel to the community library, where Eve volunteered on weekends. Hazel insisted Eve read the storybooks, claiming that Eve did the dragon voice better than any grown-up ever. Eve laughed the first time Hazel said it, but Caleb saw the flustered warmth behind her smile and stored it somewhere close, somewhere private. One afternoon, Hazel plopped onto Eve's lap with a book twice her size. "Read it like the dragon is angry, but also trying to quit coffee," she instructed seriously. Eve did her best, contorting her face dramatically and growling through exaggerated sentences. Hazel dissolved into giggles, Ranger thumped his tail in approval, and Caleb, leaning against a bookshelf, found himself smiling in a way he hadn't in years. There were other small things, too. Eve learned how Hazel insisted her hair be tied into what she called bunny ears style, 2 soft loops high on her head. Hazel claimed it made her run faster. Eve tied them every time, patient fingers smoothing the fine strands, her face soft, with an affection she never said out loud. Ranger followed her everywhere now. If Eve sat, he rested at her feet. If she moved across a room, His eyes tracked her with steady vigilance. When she laughed, his ears perked as if cataloging the sound. It was no longer subtle. Caleb noticed it every single time. One evening, as Eve helped Hazel zip her coat while Ranger sat beside them like a knight sworn to his queen, Caleb called out, "He's attached to you. More than I've seen him attached to anyone outside our family." Eve froze for a second, not because she misunderstood, but because she understood perfectly. Family. The word echoed inside her like a dropped stone rippling outward. They didn't talk about it further. They didn't need to. The quiet between them was warm. Snow fell more heavily the following week. Eve joined Caleb and Hazel at a small park near the lake. Hazel ran ahead wearing pink mittens and boots too big for her, kicking clumps of snow and singing something that sounded vaguely like Jingle Bells, though she had rewritten half the lyrics. Caleb walked beside Eve. He was dressed in a navy sweater beneath his field jacket, sleeves pushed up to reveal strong forearms dusted with old scars. His presence felt steady, unintimidating, yet powerful in its calmness. Eve felt strangely safe next to him, something she hadn't felt with anyone in years. Hazel squealed, trying to climb a small snowbank. Eve laughed and jogged ahead. "Slow down, bunny ears." Hazel slipped. It happened. Fast. Too fast. Her foot skidded on a patch of frozen slush. She pitched sideways toward the curb, separating the park walkway from the icy road. Eve sprinted, reaching out, but Ranger moved first. The shepherd launched forward in a streak of sable fur and muscle. His paws hit the ground before Eve's fingertips reached Hazel's coat. Ranger cut Hazel's fall with his body, wedging himself between her and the sharp concrete edge. She landed on his back instead of the pavement. "Daddy," Hazel gasped, more startled than hurt. Eve froze, chest constricting. Caleb was already at Hazel's side, checking her quickly with trained precision. When he saw she was unharmed, he crouched lower, his hand pressed to Ranger's neck in deep, quiet gratitude. Ranger looked up, eyes calm, steady, as if this was nothing more than a duty he was born for. But Caleb understood. Dogs like Ranger didn't throw themselves under children by accident, not unless they saw them as their own, and he had chosen Hazel long ago. But this moment held something new. Ranger shifted, turning toward Eve. His gaze settled on her with the unmistakable resolve of a protector. Caleb rose slowly. "He's never done that for anyone except Hazel," he murmured. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "He only guards the ones he considers family." Eve's breath faltered. Family. The word didn't echo this time. It crashed. She swallowed, brushing snow from Hazel's mittens with trembling fingers. "I'm okay," Hazel chirped. "Ranger saved me. He's my superhero dog." Caleb looked at Eve, not at Hazel, not at Ranger, but at Eve, with something raw, something unguarded in his expression, something like wonder mixed with fear. He didn't speak it, but Eve felt the unspoken truth settle between them. It wasn't just Ranger choosing her now. Caleb was close behind. Margot Warren stood a few yards away. Caleb's mother, silver-haired and slender, wrapped in a deep burgundy winter coat with a thick scarf tucked neatly beneath her chin. Her eyes, sharp blue with lines earned from a hard life, held the quiet weight of someone who had seen too many losses and recognized the signs of a new beginning from a distance. She had arrived earlier to meet them, but stayed back, observing. Now she approached, boots crunching softly over the snow. "Hazel," she said gently, brushing the child's cheek. "You scared us all." Hazel held up Ranger's paw proudly. "He caught me like a hero." Margot smiled affectionately before her gaze lifted to Caleb, then to Eve. Her expression changed, softened, then sharpened with insight. "I saw what happened," she said quietly. Caleb stiffened. "Mom?" Margot placed a hand on his arm. Her voice was low, not harsh, but unwavering. "Fear has protected you, Caleb, and I understand why. But if you're not careful, it will be the very thing that takes away the best blessing God has sent you in a long time." Her eyes flicked meaningfully to Eve. Eve's breath caught. Caleb looked down, jaw tightening. "I'm not—" Margot interrupted with the gentleness of a mother who loved her son enough not to let him lie to himself. "You're afraid to lose again. I get it. But some things aren't meant to be held at arm's length. Some things you lean into." She placed Hazel's hand into Eve's, then stepped back. The gesture said more than any conversation could. Eve felt Hazel's small fingers wrap around hers, felt Ranger leaning against her leg, felt Caleb watching, silent, conflicted, hopeful. For the first time, Eve wondered if she was the one being asked to be brave now. Later, as the sky turned lavender and the last of the snow settled gently around them, Eve stood beside Caleb while Hazel chased Ranger in silly zigzags across the quiet park. Eve spoke first. "I think I'm falling too deep," she whispered, "and it scares me." Caleb didn't move, but his voice was low, almost hoarse. "You're not the only one who's scared." She turned her face toward him, but he kept his eyes on Hazel, on the little girl who anchored them both. Then, finally, he said what neither of them had dared admit until now. "But for the first time in years, I don't want to run from what scares me." Eve's breath trembled. Warmth, slow, steady, impossible to resist, pressed against the cold edges inside her. And though nothing was decided, everything had shifted. Not a declaration, not a promise. Just the slow bloom of something real, something waiting for a name. If this story touched your heart today, please like, comment, and subscribe. Sometimes God brings the right people and the right love into our lives exactly when we need them. The night of the Alyssa Hope Center fundraiser shimmered with elegance. Soft orchestral music, chandeliers glittering like frozen stars, and guests wrapped in gowns and tuxedos that whispered as they moved. Eve Hartley stood beside Caleb Warren at the entrance, her navy dress falling in clean lines around her frame, her dark hair curled lightly at the ends. She looked composed, almost serene, though the thrum in her chest betrayed her nerves. Caleb wore a fitted charcoal suit that still couldn't hide the Marine beneath it. Broad shoulders, straight spine, a jaw set like he was bracing for impact. Hazel, bouncing excitedly between them, wore a sparkly gold dress, her bunny ears hairstyle slightly crooked. At her side trotted Ranger, his sable coat brushed until it shone, alert yet calm, the perfect canine silhouette. At first, everything felt almost easy. Guests greeted Caleb with warm familiarity. Many had known Alyssa, his late wife, and offered gentle smiles to Hazel, who responded with tiny curtsies that made everyone laugh. Eve stayed close, but not clingy, offering polite nods as Caleb introduced her simply as a friend, though the warmth in his tone whispered more. Hazel darted through the crowd, tugging Ranger along. The dog stayed perfectly at her side, his attentive gaze sweeping the room like a loyal sentinel. It was going well. It really was. Until Hazel saw a group of women, Alyssa's former colleagues, clustered near the champagne table. "Daddy, look," she squealed. "Mommy's friends." Before anyone could stop her, Hazel sprinted across the room, Ranger racing behind her. And then Hazel pointed right at Eve with a smile that could have lit the entire hall. "This is my new mommy." Silence pulsed outward like a shock wave. Champagne glasses paused mid-air. Conversations died mid-sentence. The music kept playing, but it felt suddenly too loud, too inappropriate, too bright. Eve froze. Caleb froze. The women exchanged glances, those tight, polite, devastating glances that held both judgment and pity. One woman, blonde hair swept in a sleek chignon, leaned to her friend and whispered, "That was fast, wasn't it?" Another, a tall man with graying temples and a sharp suit, tilted his head, assessing Eve with thinly veiled skepticism. "Are you sure," he asked Caleb quietly, "that she's the right fit for Hazel and for Alyssa's legacy?" The air constricted around her. Eve's breath stuttered. She felt her heart retreat the way it had so many times before. Quietly, instinctively, like she was already preparing to be replaced. Caleb's face paled, panic flickering through his eyes. He stepped forward, scooping Hazel into his arms, murmuring something Eve couldn't hear. Then he grabbed Eve's hand and pulled her away from the crowd, away from the whispers, into a dim hallway lined with framed photographs of Alyssa's work. He didn't stop until the music became muffled behind two doors. Caleb turned back to her, fear carved into every line of his face. "Eve," he breathed, I didn't know Hazel would say that. I'm not ready for her to think her mom is being replaced. I'm not ready." Eve stared at him, not angry, not shocked, just quietly, painfully, human. "Caleb," she whispered, "your pain is real, I know that. And I would never want to erase Alyssa, ever." His shoulders eased just slightly, but her next words struck deeper. "But I'm real too." Caleb flinched. Eve stepped back, her eyes shimmering with the kind of hurt that didn't demand an apology, just understanding. "You're so afraid of losing the past," she said, her voice steady but fragile, "that you're letting that fear lose the present." Caleb opened his mouth, but silence hollowed the space between them. He didn't deny it. He didn't reach for her. And the absence of both broke something inside her. She nodded once, more to herself than to him. "Thank you for being honest," she whispered, "even if it hurt." Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Her steps steady, though every one of them felt like a tiny fracture. Behind her, Ranger whined softly, a low, aching sound. His paws shifted like he wanted to follow her. But Hazel, confused and clutching his harness, held him back. The shepherd looked from Hazel to Eve, his instincts torn, then let out a final, mournful sound as Eve slipped out of sight. Outside, snow fell in silent flakes, gathering on Eve's lashes as she stepped into the night. Her breath billowed in the cold air, trembling like the breath of someone who'd hoped too deeply. Halfway down the steps, she stopped. She felt it. Something watching her. Not dangerous, not frightening, just present. She turned back toward the tall windows of the ballroom. Ranger was standing there. Pressed against the glass, his golden eyes locked on her with an expression so heartbreakingly aware it made her knees weaken. His breath fogged the pain with every exhale. He lifted one paw and rested it on the glass. A gesture so simple, so impossibly loyal. It felt like a message. I didn't want to stay behind. Eve's chest constricted. Then Hazel pulled Ranger away, the dog resisting for half a second before duty won. The moment snapped, and Eve turned away, snow swallowing her footsteps as she walked into the cold. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Snow blurred the world into nothing but white and streetlights. Eve's hands tightened around the steering wheel, the ache in her chest familiar but sharper this time. She'd been careful, slow, respectful, hopeful. And still, she had become the woman standing alone in winter. Again, the one who wasn't chosen, again. But beneath that pain, something else trembled, a crack of strength she hadn't felt in years. Because this time, she hadn't been rejected for not being enough. This time, she walked away because she deserved more. She deserved truth. She deserved courage. She deserved someone who wouldn't let ghosts dictate the love he was allowed to give. She deserved a man brave enough to choose her as much as she chose him. And maybe, just maybe, Caleb Warren wasn't ready yet. Eve wiped her cheeks, inhaled the sharp winter air, and whispered into the empty car, "Lord, if this isn't meant to break me, then give me the strength to wait, or to walk away." Snow drifted down in gentle spirals, and she drove on. If this chapter moved your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe. Sometimes God heals through the very storms we fear the most. The morning after the fundraiser felt heavier than any winter Eve Hartley had known. Snow drifted lazily outside her apartment window, each flake landing with the soft finality of a closed door. She moved slowly, like her body was trying to protect her heart from cracking any further. When she stepped outside to leave for work, she almost missed the small envelope taped gently to her door. Her breath caught. It wasn't a bill or advertisement. It was hand-decorated with uneven crayon hearts, some crooked, some overlapped like they were drawn in bursts of excitement. Her name was written across the front in Hazel's unmistakably wobbly handwriting. Eve's chest tightened. She tore the envelope open with trembling fingers. The first thing that fell into her hand was a drawing, Hazel's drawing. 3 stick figures stood beneath a sun. One was small with H over her head. One was tall with broad shoulders labeled Dad. And next to them stood a third figure, long hair drawn in golden scribbles. Beside the figures sat Ranger, a big, impossible-to-miss blob of brown and gray with 4 legs in every direction. And above them, in large, shaky letters, "I want you to be my mommy now, not the old one. Love, Hazel." Eve's breath broke. Her knees gave way, and she sat right there on the cold step, the letters shaking in her hands. Tears spilled freely, quiet, undramatic, deeply human. Not because she was hurt, but because she had never, not once in her life, been chosen so purely. Something else slipped from the envelope. Her lost earring, the small pearl teardrop she had worn the night of the fundraiser. She hadn't even realized it was missing. But someone had. Caleb. No one else would have known it mattered. Eve pressed the earring to her chest, head falling forward as a sob escaped. A sound carrying years of longing she never admitted, never named. For the first time in her life, she felt like someone had reached into the hollowed places of her heart and lit a small candle inside. Evening crept in with a hush, muted by falling snow. Eve wrapped herself in a blanket and sat on the couch, staring at the drawing on her lap. Ranger's chaotic scribbles, Hazel's hopeful smile, Caleb's steady figure, hers. She traced the outline of her stick figure hand linked with Hazel's. "You're too close," she whispered to the empty room. "Too close to wanting this." A faint sound interrupted the quiet, a soft scratching at the door. Eve's eyes widened. Another scratch. She opened the door. Ranger sat there in the hallway, snowflakes clinging to his fur, chest rising and falling with soft, controlled breaths. His sable coat glistened under the hallway lights. He lifted his head slowly, eyes glowing warm amber as they met hers. And in those eyes, Eve saw everything she didn't want to admit. He had come for her, alone, because he knew. Ranger stepped forward and gently placed his head against her thigh. A low, whimpering ruffle vibrated from his chest, less a plea, more a message. Eve knelt, cupping his face. "What is it, baby?" she whispered. Is something wrong? Ranger nudged her hand with unusual insistence. Then he turned toward the stairwell and waited. Eve's heart thudded. It felt like the dog was saying, "Come, tonight is not meant for you to be alone." Before she could stand, footsteps echoed up the stairwell, fast, uneven, someone running. Caleb appeared. He stopped at the top step, chest heaving, snow clinging to his hair, coat soaked through, breath catching like he had sprinted through a storm, or through something heavier than the weather. He stood there a long second, staring at Eve as if he wasn't sure she was real. Then, "Eve." Her name left his lips cracked, raw, almost broken. He stepped forward. "I messed up," he said breathlessly. "I messed up last night. I let fear steer my mouth. I hurt you because I was afraid of what Hazel said. Afraid of losing Alyssa all over again if anything changed. Afraid of letting myself want something that felt too good after everything I lost." Snow melted down his collar. His eyes were a storm of regret and something deeper, something that had taken 3 years to return. "But I know what I want now." Eve swallowed, unable to speak. Caleb moved closer, voice trembling in a way she had never heard. "Hazel chose you," he said softly. "Ranger chose you, and I—" His voice cracked. "I choose you too." Her hand flew to her mouth. "Not to replace Alyssa," he whispered. "She will always be part of us. But what I'm choosing now, what I'm praying for, is to build the next part of my life with you." Tears ran freely down Eve's face. Caleb's breath shuddered. "I knew your heart before I knew your name," he said. "And losing you last night felt like losing something I didn't even realize I was already holding." For a moment, neither moved. The snow kept falling, soft, gentle, the sky itself holding its breath. Then Eve stepped into him, and Caleb caught her with both arms, pulling her into the kind of embrace that didn't fear loss anymore. An embrace that promised he would hold on this time. Eve buried her face against his neck. Caleb exhaled shakily, pressing his cheek to her hair. Ranger nudged Eve's hand with his cold nose, tail thumping once against the floor, as if sealing the promise himself. The 3 of them stood there in the hallway, a small circle of warmth in the middle of winter's freeze. And for the first time since Alyssa's passing, Caleb didn't feel like he was standing between past and future. He was standing in a beginning. If this chapter moved your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe. Sometimes God sends healing through the people and the moments we least expect. Morning rose slowly over Seattle, pale gold seeping through thin winter clouds, touching the Warren household with a gentleness that felt almost sacred. Eve Hartley woke before the others, startled by the strange but beautiful realization that she hadn't slept this peacefully in months. There was no rush in her chest, no ache pressing against her ribs. Only quiet, only warmth. Downstairs, the kitchen was already alive. Hazel was standing on her step stool, an oversized chef's hat sliding over one eyebrow. A wooden spoon, too long for her tiny hands, wobbled dangerously as she stirred a bowl of batter. Flour dusted her red pajamas like fresh snowfall. "Daddy," she announced triumphantly without looking back. "I'm making pancake for our new family day." Caleb Warren, 6'2" and broad-shouldered, stood beside her wearing an apron Hazel had decorated with glitter glue. It read, "World's Best Dad," with the A backward. His dark hair was tousled from sleep, and faint stubble brushed along his jaw, making him look softer than usual, like a man who could finally breathe again. He lifted the hat gently off Hazel's eyes. "That's great, sweetheart. But try not to stir the bowl like you're trying to summon a hurricane." Hazel snorted in laughter. "Hurricanes make better pancakes." Eve leaned on the doorway, taking the scene in. Caleb's smile, Hazel's messy joy, the sunlight glinting on the steel fridge, and Ranger, 4-year-old German Shepherd, sable black and gray, lying under the table with his chin on his paws, tail thumping every time Hazel's voice rose with excitement. This chaos, this warmth, this imperfect beauty, felt like something holy. "Good morning," Eve said softly. Caleb turned. His eyes softened instantly. "Morning," Hazel gasped when she saw Eve. "Mommy Eve, you're awake. Come taste the pancake mix. I think I accidentally invented a new flavor. It's called maybe cinnamon, but maybe also soap." Eve laughed, stepping closer. "Soap? I washed the spoon," Hazel said proudly, "with more spoon." Caleb sighed. "We have a lot to work on." Ranger nudged Eve's knee gently, like he was checking if she was truly there, truly staying. His eyes, warm amber, always observant, shimmered with the same grounded loyalty that had followed her across every room these past weeks. Eve knelt, brushing his fur. "Good morning, Ranger." He pressed his forehead into her palm, a gesture so full of devotion that it tightened her throat. Eve moved toward the counter and began setting the table. She placed plates carefully, aligning silverware, then pulled a small wildflower from her coat pocket. A simple white one she'd found sprouting through the frost outside the front steps. Something about its persistence felt meaningful. She placed it in a small glass vase at the center of the table. Ranger sniffed it approvingly. As she adjusted the last napkin, footsteps approached from behind. Margot Warren, Caleb's mother, entered the kitchen, elegant even in her 60s, with silver curls pinned back and a burgundy cardigan wrapped neatly around her shoulders. She moved with the steady grace of someone who had weathered storms and carried wisdom gently. She paused at the doorway, taking in the scene. Hazel squealing over pancake batter, Caleb burned by a rogue splash of oil, Ranger circling Eve like a silent guardian. Margot's eyes softened. Then she walked toward Eve and rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Welcome to the family, dear." Eve froze. Not from discomfort. No. From the quiet shock of finally being seen as someone worth embracing, not merely tolerated. A warmth she had once feared she'd never feel again surged through her chest. She swallowed hard, blinking tears she hadn't expected. "Thank you," she whispered. Margot gave her shoulder a firm, reassuring squeeze before turning to Hazel. "Now, who wants Grandma to rescue these pancakes from becoming charcoal?" Hazel let out a battle cry. "Me!" Caleb held up his hands. "Please, take over, before the smoke alarm thinks we're under attack." The kitchen erupted into laughter. They gathered around the small wooden table, lopsided pancakes stacked proudly in the center, crowned with whipped cream and a very confused strawberry that Hazel insisted looked like a hat. Hazel raised her tiny glass of milk. "I want to make a toast." Everyone paused. Caleb, Eve, Margot, even Ranger seemed to sit straighter. Hazel cleared her throat dramatically. "To Daddy, to Mommy Eve, to Grandma, and to Ranger who saved me from cracking my head open like an egg." Caleb choked slightly on his coffee. Margot pressed her lips together to hide a laugh. Eve covered her mouth, unable to contain her smile. Hazel beamed. "And to our new family, the best family in the universe." Caleb reached under the table quietly, finding Eve's hand. His palm was warm, rough, steady. Everything her life had never been before now. He gave her fingers a small, deliberate squeeze. "Family isn't always who's there at the beginning," he said softly, eyes resting on her. "It's who stays when your heart can't hold itself up." Eve inhaled slowly. The words filled her like sunlight through stained glass, colored, fractured, but beautiful. She looked around the room. Hazel swinging her legs on the booster seat, syrup smudged on her cheek. Margot cutting pancakes with the precision of a seasoned grandmother. Ranger's tail thumping rhythmically against a cabinet. Caleb sitting beside her with that quiet awe in his eyes, as if he still couldn't believe she was real. And Eve thought of that night, Christmas Eve, when she believed love had walked past her forever. But love had simply taken the long road. It had circled through snowstorms, through grief, through a lonely Marine trying to protect the pieces of his heart, through a little girl with boundless warmth, through a shepherd who sensed truths before humans did. It had walked slowly, but it had come. Hazel suddenly slid off her chair, ran around the table and threw her arms around Eve's waist. "Mommy Eve, will you stay forever?" Eve knelt, cupping Hazel's cheeks, her voice barely a whisper. "I've been here. From the first moment you hugged me, sweetheart." Hazel squealed in delight. Caleb leaned in, resting a hand on Eve's back. "We're a family," he murmured. "Not because we were born that way, but because we're brave enough to choose one another." Ranger placed his head across both of their knees, letting out a long, contented sigh. Outside the kitchen window, snow drifted gently, the morning light soft as a promise. And for the first time in a long time, Eve Hartley felt something she had never dared believe she deserved. Home. If this ending warmed your spirit, please like, comment, and subscribe. Sometimes God builds families not from blood, but from the courage to love again. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive in thunder or fire, but in the quiet moments when a broken heart finds a home again. We believe God still moves gently through ordinary days, guiding people toward the love, comfort, and second chances they never expected. If this story touched something in your spirit, share it with someone who might need the reminder that hope has not forgotten their name. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and join our community of hearts learning to heal together. May God bless you, protect your home, and lead you to the miracles waiting in your own everyday life.